There is an ongoing medical scandal unfolding in this country, which for the most part has been ignored. That is, children who are troubled and confused and claim they don't know which gender they are being given puberty blockers, possibly leading to irreparable damage which cannot be reversed. US President Donald Trump this week signed an executive order restricting gender transitions for anyone younger than 19. Yet, here in Australia, we are so far behind the rest of the world on this serious issue. In what world do we accept that it's okay for Aussie kids to take puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones and eventually have all their reproductive organs rearranged under the guise of clinical best practice and gender-affirming care? It's child abuse. It's a sham. Now, don't get me wrong, children deserve best practice, but one based on science, not feelings. And this is why we need an urgent national independent inquiry into medical gender transitions for children. This week, Queensland froze hormone therapy for new patients under the age of 18 after it was discovered a 12-year-old in Cairns was allegedly given puberty blockers without parental consent or appropriate medical guidance. Now, it's since been revealed 42 patients aged between 12 and 18 were treated outside of best practice guidelines. Now, firstly, aside from these damning and concerning allegations, what exactly is best practice when it comes to handing out hormones to kids who can't even vote, can't drive, but apparently can make an informed decision under the guise of best practice to change their gender? Growing worldwide evidence would suggest there is no best practice, that it's driven by ideology, not backed up by any significant research. And secondly, if this one clinic has allegedly gone rogue, how many more are there in Australia who are exploiting children? Well, you only need to look to the UK for answers. The National Health Service in England last year banned the use of puberty blockers in children, saying we have concluded that there is not enough evidence to support the safety or clinical effectiveness of puberty blockers to make the treatment routinely available at this time. And this decision was in line with a key recommendation of paediatrician Hilary Cass following an extensive examination of the care provided to children at London's Tavistock Clinic. Hilary Cass found significant gaps in evidence regarding the use of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in children. It found that an ideologically driven approach at the Tavistock had essentially transplanted usual clinical governance and that children were being rushed onto the drugs and placed on a medical pathway that almost invariably progressed to the later prescription of cross-sex hormones and sometimes surgery. Now, this should send warnings across the world that activism is dictating care for children. And I fear here at home this is too contentious of an issue for our politicians to tackle. Now, I welcome Queensland's pause on the practice, but here was the Queensland Health Minister this week, and have a listen to what he said.
Paediatric gender care is a rapidly evolving area of health involving complex medical, psychological, family and social considerations.
Well, let's get to the basics. Gender is fixed, and it's not complex. It's science. Male and female, boys and girls. You can't argue with biology. The minister says this requires consideration. This doesn't change the science. Yes, children who are troubled need help and care, but not fed lies and pushed down a dangerous path. And as for a rapidly evolving area of health, what a load of nonsense. This is a concerning practice which could have devastating impacts on children. This gender affirmation approach, this tiptoeing around the issue is dangerous. You only need to look at the Sex Discrimination Commissioner's response to Queensland's ban. Anna Cody labelled it as discriminatory, saying it has the potential to harm the physical and mental well-being of children. Well, hang on. What about the failure of a clinic to protect a vulnerable young person? What about the failure of a clinic to speak to the parents of a vulnerable young person? The Australian reports that Australia lags behind when it comes to transparency around our gender clinics, who rely on professional consensus and best practices rather than results from randomised controlled trials and systematic reviews. And previous calls for inquiries have fallen on deaf ears in Victoria, in South Australia, even in federal parliament. And now Sky News has revealed more than 100 public figures have signed an open letter demanding the government hold an urgent national inquiry. Among the signatories is former Prime Minister Tony Abbott.
We should be incredibly reluctant to allow minors who can't buy cigarettes, who can't buy alcohol, who can't vote, who can't drive a car legally. We should be incredibly reluctant to let these minors opt to do themselves what is potentially irreparable damage that they may well later regret.
We can no longer turn a blind eye to this child abuse. Australia needs a thorough, independent inquiry, just like the UK's Cass inquiry. And we should learn the lessons from overseas. The more we allow ideology to act under best practice guidelines, the more we risk a generation of confused and mentally ill children. We can't let political correctness defeat science.